we have to go back to some real basics. And I always start with soil and, bringing, the ambition of bringing coffee back to its forest roots, that, there are so many multiple benefits when you have, build an ecosystem around the coffee plot, within the coffee plot. And, you're bringing in natural predators to pests, you're bringing in natural defense systems against disease, you're protecting against drought and floods and, all of the climate variations. And it's a big shift because so much of the effort has been moving farmers to more efficient, intensive production systems. But we're finding that is just, it's revealing the vulnerability of, taking coffee out of its natural habitat.
This episode is proudly brought to you by Mapper Forward's workshop, It's Time to Become a Coffee Consultant. Learn how to diversify your revenue streams and create freedom from your day job while saying goodbye to that alarm clock forever by becoming a consultant within the coffee industry or directly to consumers who have shifted towards home brewing and home roasting. Protect your income from challenging times in the coffee value chain by taking this course today. Go to mapperforward.coffee/workshops or click the link in the show notes for details. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is unfortunately the final episode in what is a spectacular series with Monika from Fairtrade International. The first of what I hope is going to become many times that we get to have a conversation on this podcast, Monika, because this has been really, I've learnt a lot. I'm starting to understand a lot more about fair trade. I'm getting a real appreciation for how complex this situation is that fair trade is dealing with. And another thing I'm really understanding is that you guys are a small team in coffee, even though the organization is quite big, but you're a small team in coffee trying to navigate a whole bunch of different issues in different origins. And some of the questions that came in when we put this thing out on LinkedIn, people were like, how come fair trade can't have, why is it unified? Why is the price the same in every country, right? And I'm now getting a greater appreciation for why perhaps that can't happen. Not that maybe it shouldn't happen, but there is a lot that goes on behind the scenes. So I hope we continue this conversation regularly, and I'm really grateful for you being here. Now, in this episode of the series, folks, we're going to be talking about what role can fair trade play in the coffee crisis. Monika, where can fair trade play a role in the coffee crisis?
So our role in the coffee crisis, I think when we talk about the coffee crisis, maybe we first need to define of all the multiple crises that we're facing, which is, we're dealing with a rapidly changing world, and whether it's related to climate, conflict, cost of living, new regulations, we're being called upon to adapt and act quickly and effectively on all of these. It's a big, it's a very full basket these days. So, and there are many, many initiatives underway. I would say all too often in many different contexts that these changes are being drafted, whether it's legislation or new initiatives, in silos and not taking into consideration the real life contexts and the challenges that so many producers face. And this lends itself to a very high risk of unintended consequences. And I will still hope to believe that so much of what we see in that's in the process of changing, that there are good intentions behind it, but so often it all depends on how things get rolled out. And so the solution, I think, is very simple in theory, that we just need to be bringing the producer voices into these conversations and into the decision-making processes at the earliest possible opportunity. In practice, particularly in the case of coffee, I know it gets a little more complicated, especially when you look at the diversity of producer realities and then, identifying which producers get to be at the table. So I understand that that's a bit complex, but I think simply by bringing in a wider diversity of voices to the table before decisions are made will help us come up with solutions to crises that, we only seem to be accumulating crises lately and not quickly resolving. I think the climate crisis is like in the coffee industry is an obvious and clearly highly researched, clearly defined, and we must find solutions to buffer the climate impact. But again, like I think the research and so much of the project work has been driven in isolation and often with an eye for like a silver bullet solution rather than acknowledging that we need to step back and look at the larger coffee ecosystem. And it has, with all of its, diversifications, diversity, its rich texture, the history and the complexity of this, and bring farmers into the solution, like the solution finding process. And I have seen amazing work happening at the farm level and often supported by, highly functional technical teams within their cooperatives that are promoting simple solutions. And, if you look at the numbers of farmers out there, of course, we're focusing first and foremost on the 825,000 farmers that we're working with, but there are millions of farmers out there and everyone is being subjected to the same kinds of stresses. So solutions that are real solutions have to be adaptable. They have to be appropriate. They have to be economical, readily available, and they have to be massively replicable. So, I've seen some really interesting pilot projects, but like if a pilot project working with the, 50 farmers or 100 farmers and it's costing $1 million, like do the math. What is it going to take? It's not
scalable.
Yeah, we have to go back to some real basics. And I always start with soil and, bringing, the ambition of bringing coffee back to its forest roots that, there are so many multiple benefits when you have, build an ecosystem around the coffee plot, within the coffee plot. And, you're bringing in natural predators to pests, you're bringing in natural defense systems against disease, you're protecting against drought and floods and, all of the climate variations. And it's a big shift because so much of the effort has been moving farmers to more efficient, intensive production systems. But we're finding that is just, it's revealing the vulnerability of, taking coffee out of its natural habitat. So Fairtrade is listening, is watching, is listening to the challenges that farmers are, bringing to the table. And in Fairtrade, I think to our detriment, we were focused for many, many years on, for many years of our evolution on more economic and social justice. And with sort of a historical attitude of, well, there are so many environmental initiatives out there, so let's focus on this is what we're really doing best. But, quickly realized that we need, like, this is a three-legged stool. These all need to be under our roof. And there is, a whole environmental policy. It's been worked into our standards now for many, many years, but really strengthening that for, an intentional push towards agroecology and, really trying to bring in evidence and examples and opportunity for farmers to pick up, best organic, best environmental practices in their production. So, it's like part of our strength is, having all those ears and eyes on the ground and bringing the evidence to the table. And then the challenge is to come up with it's too diverse to come up with, it's not our job to necessarily come up with the specific work plans, but to build in some guardrails, some advice, access to knowledge, and kind of setting the stage of expectations to be moving continually in this direction for climate protection, climate smart, nature-based solutions, and in kind of helping farmers find ways to work with the forces of nature to regenerate their fields, as opposed to constantly being battling against nature. And then having nature battle against us.
It's a vicious cycle right now. This raises this kind of idea that, is there a possibility that producers who are focused on regenerative agriculture and produce coffee using that method could perhaps maybe earn a differential on top of the fair trade amount? Is that something that could perhaps be in the future?
Everything is possible in the future.
Who knows?
There is a regenerative organic certification out there. We did, when we reviewed our minimum price, we also reviewed the organic premium. And so that also got a boost from 30 to 40 cents a pound. And the idea being that, first of all, organic standards are also changing in a number in Europe and in North America. And so there's all kinds of work that farmer organizations are needing to do now to, make sure they're going to be compliant, but also as a way to incentivize an acceleration of work in organic practices towards a more agroecological system. And for sure, and it's like, the challenge with premiums is that, like, what you're tagging your premium to has to make sense to the consumers. And unfortunately,
we're not there yet.
So much confusion still on what is regenerative, what's the problem with soil. Like, I find it astounding. Like, if you look at the FAO's soil atlas, and when they say we only have 60 harvests left on the planet, I do not understand why we are not all in a panic right now.
Yeah.
But, but it's one of those things that people just assume, oh, there's a fix around the corner. So, I think all of this work, and Fairtrade as well, like, we had to do a lot of outreach to explain to people, like, what's the problem? What's the problem with free trade? What's the problem with trade? What's the challenge that small scale farmers are facing, for people to say, oh, I didn't even know there's a problem, so now I want to invest in a solution. And I feel like it's similar with the environment and soils, and people understanding, that there are very relatively simple, very accessible, practical steps that people can take to protect their landholding and even potentially sequester more carbon and really, turn production into a, climate
other
solutions
revenue streams.
But for people to wrap their heads around that, I feel like it is still, unfortunately, there's a lot of misunderstanding. So I think we need to do a lot of promotion, and I would support you 200% to do some podcasts on this whole issue and help bring people to talk about, like, what it is and what the potential is there, and why this is so urgent that we move forward with it. So,
and we're going to do more than podcasts. We've got, people will hear about it soon, hopefully, when we're ready to start the marketing for an upcoming project that we've got going. But we'll talk about more about that at another time, because the time that I have with you is precious. Yes. And I have another question that I want to ask you. I want to ask you about EUDR. And, it seems like right now a lot of press is coming out about concerns as we edge closer to the end of this year about EUDR for coffee producers.
Right.
What can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So, I think the biggest challenge with that, first of all, I think clearly we need to stop deforesting. And I 100%. Think people understand that. And I think that this legislation was so well received in the public in Europe, and was so easy for them to pass that legislation. But it also comes, now the implementation, it definitely comes with a responsibility to explain what does compliance look like? There are some terms around like people trying to prepare, their geolocators and people are, trust me, people are scrambling to get all of that data collected. It is not, it is not just a little switch that you flip and then suddenly everything's there. It's a lot of work and people are on it. But, there were all kinds of expectations that, there was sort of a hierarchy of like urgency and those most at risk. But like those most at risk, that term has yet to be defined. And this is coming into active implementation at the end of the year. Like that's tomorrow.
It's less than 5 months away.
Yeah. Like in my world, that's like tomorrow. And so like so much promise of, supports going in to facilitate making this happen, but like, how do people get access to this? And what does that support look like? So like, those are some of the challenges where, again, it's, it's, if people are sitting at their desk thinking, someone will just like open their smartphone and all of a sudden all this data is going to pull down and they're just going to be like forwarding it on. Like, that's not the reality we're dealing with. It's been a very concerted effort with the Fairtrade advocacy team, with other advocacy teams who are looking at, how to make sure that, the needs of those who will be most impacted are being understood, that the tools to help people prepare are being provided. And it has not been an easy conversation. It's not, so it definitely has, fair trade farmers on alert. It has the entire industry on alert.
100%.
And so it's, again, I just, I wish we lived in a world where those being impacted would be the first to be consulted when new legislations like this come in. And, and also I just feel like, what would these last 2 years have looked like if, for example, new legislation would have been suggested by the EU to say, oh, we're only going to buy coffee grown under shade, for example. We would have seen people running around like crazy, creating tree nurseries, planting trees. It's like we want the same results, but it's important how we get there.
And there's this kind of entitlement that comes with creating these kinds of legislations without consulting the people that it's going to most impact. There's like the last couple of years while people have been preparing for this, and, particularly this year, which is when people thought seriously about like, how is this going to impact us? The effort that they have had to attribute to trying to figure out how to solve a problem that if their containers show up to Europe and it's not going to be accepted, what ends up happening? Or finding buyers so that they don't have to deal with adapting to this. As though we don't have enough problems in this coffee crisis. It's so multidimensional.
Yeah, there are many moving pieces at once. And and that is unfortunate for sure. So
there are a lot of things we did not touch on that I really wanted to touch on, but it's another 5 episodes of all of that.
Okay.
You must come back, please. This has been a joy. And I appreciate you sitting, doing this, because we went over on a lot of episodes. So I have absolutely taxed far too much of your time. I'm very grateful for that. And I'm grateful to everyone that's listening that has listened to the whole series. Monika, what I want to ask you as we wrap this up is, if people want to, I'm not saying support fair trade, although I would encourage, like, if you want to support fair trade, support fair trade. But if people, let's say, have perhaps had like a negative experience with fair trade, or they have, this idea that fair trade's corrupt and you shouldn't have anything to do with it, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of people say stuff like that. What's your suggestion to their next step after having listened to this?
let's have a conversation. Let's understand what you aspire to in coffee. And, and I know so many traders who maybe are doing a little bit of fair trade, or maybe they're just working with the same organizations. We have so much in common. And there are so many ways that I think we could collaborate, open the door to greater collaboration across the industry. And let's dispel perhaps some of those. Sometimes it's misunderstandings. Sometimes it was a bad experience. Like, let's understand what went wrong and let's try and fix things, because we are truly all in this mess together. And Fairtrade has some time-tested, effective tools to support farmers in order for them to build this resilience to price and climate, and so many things that are coming at the coffee supply side, and the industry is benefiting from that. But let's leverage what we have to gain together and work together in those directions. I think it's a great development in launching this whole program towards agroecology. There are a lot of companies that were more focused on organic than social, for example. But now we have another set of common vocabulary that we can work on together, and it is all part of this larger picture of how to increase living income and prosperity for farmers, like assuring a livelihood for farmers into the future. And I think everyone really needs to be concerned about where the next generation of coffee farmers are coming from, because it is a tough business and we all depend on that bean if we're in the coffee industry. So, there are lots of ways that I think we can work together, and let's open the conversation.
And if people do want to get in contact with Fairtrade, what's the best way to do that?
I would say most likely, if you're a trader, there are 23 kind of the marketing Fairtrade promotional hubs around the world. Those are your most, so Fairtrade America in the US, Canada, all across Europe, in Taiwan, in Korea and Japan. And so there's, who are you? Where are you located? I think first step would be go to the
local office,
the national office. You could always reach out to, the central office as well. If there's some, I'm at coffee@fairtrade.net. You can channel any query into via the website. There's info you can get sort of directed towards. If you have a specific question, maybe it's going to the climate team, maybe it's going to the human rights due diligence team, or, there's different departments where, depending on who you are and what you want to talk about, that you would be directed in different directions as well. So, I would say reach out. We would to hear, the good, the bad experiences. We're in, as we mentioned, this is always a work in progress, and we are open to having these conversations.
I love that. I'm very grateful for your openness and your vulnerability as a person, as a representative of Fairtrade, but also as the organization. Your team were very open to this. And just to clarify, guys, Fairtrade have not paid for this series. There's no financial transaction that's happening. This is just Fairtrade and Mapper Forward wanting to have a discussion. Like every other guest on the podcast, I just want to be very transparent about that. Fairtrade is not a sponsor of Mapper Forward. That there's no agreement, just to be very clear. Is that correct? Is what I just said correct?
That is correct, yeah. Fantastic. And I am just so delighted to have met you and to
likewise
have had the opportunity to dive into some of your episodes. It's very enlightening, and and I think it's a great it's a great arena for these kinds of conversations. And again, looking forward to hearing about any feedback you get. And for sure,
Perfect.
if there's a follow-up conversation, I'd be happy to join you for sure.
Well, I'm going to take you up on that offer. I'm telling you that from now. Thank you so much. Now, would you do me the great honor of signing off this series for us, Monika?
I would just like to say peace, love, and peanut butter to you all. Yes.
Have an amazing rest of your day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode, friends. Please don't forget to show us some love by subscribing, liking, commenting, and most of all, sharing this podcast with your friends. Check the show notes for links, including our sponsors and our Patreon. And stay tuned for more great conversations on the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward.